Second service, how we doing? I mean, kind of a big day for America. NFL kind of kicks off today. Do we have some NFL fans in the room? Now, if I were to say, go Jesus, would you do the same thing? Or is that... Yeah, anyway, should be good. You're all maybe missing, here's what I know. I know that when the 49ers or Raiders play at 10 a.m., it's a little lower crowd every second service, but first service gets a little bigger, right? Anyway, so good to be with you guys. So during COVID, probably like you guys, when there wasn't a whole lot to do, we picked up watching a few more movies than we normally would watch, right? And my youngest daughter and I, we kind of picked up and found our way into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You're familiar with these guys? I think the super nerds call it the MCU, right? The Marvel Cinematic Universe. And you're not going to find Alice and I at Comic-Con or like trying to interpret, just no. On every level am I going to this place. But I know some of you, it's great. It's all good. But we don't really evaluate the movies for like their larger cultural messages. It's like we just think the movies are fun and, kind of action-packed and all of that. And one of my favorite MCU movies is Captain Marvel. You know this woman? She's sort of a rock star. And I think as a girl dad, I'm just drawn to movies that sort of empower women and highlight women as the hero. And so I'm a big Captain Marvel fan. And I really became a big Captain Marvel fan, actually, when the star, the person who plays Captain Marvel, Brie Larson, she posted a couple of videos that she called Audition Storytime Part 1 and Part 2. Now, they're really fascinating little videos because at a glance, when you look at Larson's career trajectory, her resume, absolutely one of legend. Going back to all the way when she's 6 years old, she's enrolled as the youngest student at San Francisco's American Conservatory Theater. 3 years later, she's 9. She's making an appearance on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. This opened the door for, minor roles, guest appearances. Eventually, she becomes the star of popular TV shows. She's praised for her TV acting. That opens the door to film and directing and writing. She eventually wins an Academy Award for Best Actress for her role in the movie Room. But in addition to her Oscar, she actually has 70 other sort of acting awards and recognition. I mean, she's a big deal. Again, her trajectory, stuff of fairy tale, at least on the surface. But her audition story time videos sort of outline what's underneath the surface of all of her fame. In fact, here's Larson from her video. Here's what she says. I thought I'd talk a little about my process because I think a lot of time there's been a lot of focus on my successes and not on how hard it was, how much I was rejected. And you never know all of the jobs I didn't get, so I thought it might be interesting to talk about that. Now, these two videos, it's fascinating. It catalogs, and they're like 15 minutes each, so you're not going to take a whole lot of time if you choose to go watch these, but 20 years of disappointment in this woman's life. First audition at the age of 7, all the way up. I mean, one casting director tells her agent that she's so bad, she's never going to have her in for anything else ever again, and held true to that. Never again had Larson come in for an audition. She lists in the video, literally dozens of roles she almost got that she just didn't get. Here are just some of the highlights. Gossip Girl, she was a finalist for that. Hunger Games, she was a finalist in Hunger Games. She wanted to be Rey in the last 3 kind of Star Wars movies. She didn't get that. Big Bang Theory, Peter Pan, Spy Kids. I mean, the list goes on and on. And here's how she kind of talks about it. She says this, I got told 98 to 99% of the time. I know that's hard to fully wrap your brain around, to think I've been on thousands and thousands and thousands of auditions. Because on the one hand, Larson is the embodiment of success. She has the awards, the fame, the money, the critical acclaim, list of credits, all of that, right? But on the other hand, behind the scenes, underneath the surface of her story, she has failed 99% of the time. She hit the wall and got stuck. I love her videos because so often I think we can feel fairly isolated and alone when we feel stuck. We think maybe we're the only ones that are stuck in the whole universe. But when someone like Brie Larson, megastar, Captain Marvel, spent 20 years, 2 decades, being stuck, well, now all of a sudden my stuckness doesn't feel so isolated. And here's the truth, and this is what we're going to hang on for the next month, really, as we move through this series, How to Get Unstuck. And here's the truth. We all get stuck. That's true of every single person in this room. We all get stuck between that proverbial rock and a hard place with very few options. It seems like we're unable to escape. And we get stuck in every imaginable area of our lives. Jobs we'd prefer to leave, but can't really find our way out. Relationships that we know are bad for us, but we feel stuck in them. Parents who won't listen, employees who won't change. Story of my life here at Neighborhood. No, I'm just kidding. Toxic bosses, the story of every employee at Neighborhood Church's story, right? Stubborn addictions, whatever it may be. If we experience it, we can probably get stuck in it. And sometimes we're stuck for a few hours, a few days, a few weeks, maybe a year. Other times, many years, decades, full sort of seasons of life. And sometimes it feels like we find breakthrough, and then other times it feels like we just keep hitting the same wall over and over and over and over, and we can't seem to find a way over, through, or around that wall. We just keep slamming our head into it. And one of the challenges with our stuckness is that we actually don't believe other people get stuck, because all we hear about are people's successes. We see their highlight reels on Instagram, right? We're bombarded every day by people's victories, right? Steady stream of images and videos of other people conquering the world all day long. And what that does is it creates a bit of a mirage that convinces us other people have fewer challenges than you do. But then every once in a while, someone like a Brie Larson comes along and helps dispel the myth that we're the only ones. But still, most of the time, our stuckness feels like a glitch in the system. But in reality, the roadblocks you're facing in your life, this is just a consistent feature of what it means to be a human. Your challenges, your roadblocks, the wall you're hitting is not an anomaly. It's normal because we all get stuck. Our challenges are the rule rather than the exception. Now, what I find fascinating about this idea of being stuck or stuckness or sort of hitting that wall we don't know how to get around is that the ancient authors of the Bible, they make the same observation about our human experience. It just seems like we all get stuck. In fact, that's their conclusion. We all get stuck. It comes out again and again in their writing. When we look closely, in fact, we actually discover that these authors, from beginning to the very end of this library we call the Bible, the theme that runs through it is we all get stuck. But then underneath that is another theme, and that theme, it seems these ancient authors all agreed, there's a way out. There's hope. We really can get to the other side of that wall. We don't have to stay stuck, that there's a way out, a way through our stuckness. In fact, there's a story very, very early on in the Bible, and it really is the hinge. I mean, it is the foundation for this theme of stuckness that runs all the way through the Bible. And today we call this story the Exodus story. I mean, it's a really, really important story. In fact, if you're going to understand anything really that this Bible has to say, we've got to understand this story. It's that important for what the authors of the Bible are trying to communicate to you and I. So to give you, I just want to quickly move us through this Exodus story so we kind of have an understanding of what it's about. But to do that, I have to take us back to kind of pre-Exodus story. The very first pages of the Bible. It's called, if you were to open your Bibles right now and you would go to the very beginning, you'd be reading from something we call the book of Genesis. Now, the book of Genesis is a wild ride through 50 chapters. And those 50 chapters can actually be broken up into two sections to kind of help us understand the book. The first section is chapters 1 through 11. Just like in a movie, this is like the dramatic opening sequence that is designed to get our attention. It is a whole situation. Some of the best heard of, and for sure most misunderstood parts of the Bible exist in chapters 1 through 11. It's the creation story, it's Adam and Eve, it's talking serpents, it's Noah and the flood. Maybe you've even heard of a story called the Tower of Babel. All of that happens in rapid fire succession in the first 11 chapters of Genesis. But then section 2 really makes up the rest of the book of Genesis, chapters 12 to 15. And this shifts our focus from dramatic opening sequence to the story of Israel. How did the Jewish people get their start? And here's, so I'm going to just move us as fast as I can through the book of Genesis, and it's a pretty wild story. So it begins by God calling out a man named Abraham. And we don't know anything about Abraham. We really don't know why God called him or anything like that. We can make up some reasons, but we don't really know. But Abraham is called by God, and he's promised two things. He's promised people, and he's promised land. And then pretty soon, Abraham has a son, and his son's name is Isaac. And then Isaac has a son, and his name's Jacob, right? Abraham's grandson. Now with Jacob, it gets really kind of exciting at this point. There's all sorts of deceit, plots of murder, searching for wives, really kind of fascinating stuff. But then eventually, God changes Jacob's name to Israel. If you ever wonder why the nation of Israel is called Israel, well, this is how they tell their story. Because Jacob, God changes Jacob's name to Israel. And Jacob, he has 12 sons, or Jacob or Israel has 12 sons. And these 12 sons will eventually become the 12 tribes that will make up the nation of Israel. Now, the last 1/3 of the story we find in Genesis focuses in, it zeroes in on the second youngest son of Israel, or Jacob. His name's Joseph. Now, Joseph falls in disfavor with his brothers. He ends up getting thrown into a well by them, and then he ends up like a servant in Egypt. And then through a series of really miraculous sort of God moments, he rises to be second in command over the entire empire of Egypt. Well, eventually, dad, Jacob, Israel, he dies. And then all the brothers, so the 11 brothers and their families, they move down into Egypt where Joseph is kind of running the show. They're like, why not? My big, little brother for most of us has all the power and all the wealth. Let's go hang out with him down in Egypt. Okay, and here's how Genesis ends. Joseph dies. Joseph dies, all of his brothers die, and a new generation starts up. And here's where we get introduced to the Exodus story, because here's what happens after Joseph and his brothers die. Take a look. Then a new king to whom Joseph meant nothing, so totally forgets that, Joseph was kind of a big deal and in many ways saved the Egyptian empire. Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor. So the Egyptians enslave the Hebrew people, and they are quite literally at this point stuck for 400 years. Generation after generation, they are slaves to the people of Egypt. But after 400 years of stuckness, of enslavement, of hitting the same wall again and again, a leader rises up. And this leader's name is Moses. And with the help of God and some miracles, Moses leads the Hebrew people, the Israelites, right, the Jewish people, out of Egypt and into freedom on the other side of the wall, so to speak. Moses moves them from stuck to unstuck, right? Now, it's this movement from slavery to freedom, stuck to unstuck. This is the story that we call the Exodus. Now, maybe you've never read that part of the Bible, and that's okay, because there's a couple of great movies out there about this story. Maybe you've seen the 1956 film 10 Commandments starring Charlton Heston. Anyone seen that one out there? Yeah, a few of you. Now, if you're like, I don't watch movies from the 50s, I get it. But there, 1998, there was an animated movie, right? Maybe you've seen The Prince of Egypt. Have you seen this one? Yeah, there we go. Some people are like, now we're talking. Forget Charlton Heston. Give me cartoons all day, right? And these movies are about the Exodus story. They tell the story of the Israelites' exodus out of Egypt, from slavery to freedom, right? The Exodus story is about redemption. It's a story of finding our way out of the situations that we feel stuck in. It's a story of getting around or through or over the wall we keep hitting our head against, right? This is the Exodus story. And this becomes, I cannot overemphasize this. This is the story, the absolute most important story for the Jewish people. The Exodus is the narrative that shapes Israel's identity and the kind of God they worship. You cannot not know this story. I mean, it's that important. And here's how it works. If we were having a conversation with the nation of Israel, here's how it would go. Hey, Israel, who are you? Oh, we're the people who were freed from slavery in Egypt. That's how they'd answer that question. Well, who's your God? Oh, he's the God who freed us from Egypt, right? That story, it's such a big deal that that's how they define themselves through the Exodus, that we were stuck, we got unstuck. Who helped? God. That's our God. He's the God that moves us from stuck to unstuck, from slavery to freedom, from hitting the wall to getting to the other side of the wall. In fact, it's such a big deal that on the eve of their freedom, I mean, they are going to leave town and become free the next day. God says, listen, this is going to become such a big deal in your nation's history that I need you to remember this and never forget it. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a meal. You're going to eat. You're going to celebrate every year, like forever, this moment. And today we actually call that meal something. We call it the Passover meal. And still today, Jewish people all over the world, they pause every year. And they celebrate, and they remember, and they teach their children about how God rescued their people from slavery and brought them into freedom, from stuck to unstuck. Now, the Passover meal, the Exodus story, isn't just significant for the Jewish people, because what's really fascinating is that the biographers of the life of Jesus, they take the Jewish Passover meal that celebrates their freedom from movement from slavery to freedom, stuck to unstuck. They take that Passover meal and they reframe it around Jesus. They sort of say this Passover meal is going to take on new meaning. These authors want to make the point, the biographers of the life of Jesus want to make a point that what God did for Israel during the Exodus, sort of out of Egypt, Jesus is now doing for the whole world, freeing creation, freeing humanity from slavery, from stuck. And they even tell us what they're stuck in. They're not enslaved to Egypt. The authors of the Christian scripture, we call it the New Testament, they say that we're enslaved, and they assume that we're enslaved or stuck by what they call the powers of darkness or the dominion of darkness. And he says, Jesus is the one that can move us from this dominion or power of darkness and into freedom, the light of Jesus, from stuck in the dominion of darkness into freedom, into unstuckness in the light of Jesus. Now, in Christian circles, the meal, this Passover meal, it's no longer called the Passover meal, and we certainly celebrate it differently. But what Christians today actually call the Last Supper of Jesus, or the Last Supper of Christ. It was quite literally the last meal Jesus has before he's arrested and eventually executed by the Roman Empire, right? What he's eating at his Last Supper is a Jewish Passover meal. That's what they're celebrating. And then what Jesus does is he takes the elements of the Jewish Passover meal and he says, now, from now on, I want you to eat and drink these in remembrance of me. I mean, this is really fascinating. Jesus is looking at his 100% Jewish followers. They are all Jewish. They were all raised in Judaism, right? And he says to them, I want you to celebrate Passover in memory of me, not just your liberation from slavery, your stuckness in Egypt. The Passover meal is now supposed to tell the story of how Jesus, what Jesus has done and how Jesus saves and gets us to the other side of the wall that we just keep running into. In fact, today we still celebrate this. We still want to remember this. About once a month, our church, we celebrate something called communion, or something that maybe in the tradition you grew up in, you called it Eucharist, right? We take a little, quite disgusting wafer and a little bit of juice and that little tiny symbolic meal is us remembering Jesus and what he's done in sort of providing a new exodus, if you will, not just for the nation of Israel, but for the whole of humanity. The life of Jesus, this is so important. The life of Jesus begins a new exodus, a new redemption, a new rescue that goes beyond Israel and out into the whole world. In fact, are you hanging with me? Are we good? I mean, we went through a lot. So here's Jesus. He's, maybe you know the story. He's been a carpenter. He's not really kind of out there public. Hey, I'm Jesus yet. But the day he decides he's going to go public and be like, hey, I'm not really a carpenter anymore. I'm going to be an itinerant sort of teaching rabbi, Jewish rabbi. And I'm going to go from town to town and village to village and church to church. And I'm going to teach and I'm going to have a message for the whole world. Well, the day he decides to go public and sort of announce, hey, here's my new deal and here's what I'm about, he shows up at his hometown church and he reads from an ancient Hebrew prophet named Israel. And the passage he chooses to read is all about the movement from slavery to freedom, from stuck to unstuck. Let's just take a look. He went to Nazareth, his hometown, where he'd been brought up, and on the Sabbath day, he went into the synagogue, as was his custom. So if you ever wonder, why should I go to church? Jesus went to church, right? It was his custom, so show up to church. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. So again, they don't have iPhones with the Bible app or, books or anything. They had scrolls. And so the scroll of Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, and here it is. Here's how he announces, hey, this is my new deal now. The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. Goes on. He has sent me, and here it is, to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, and to set liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Now, in Jesus' day, the year of the Lord's favor, that was the year all debt was forgiven and all the slaves were set free. Jesus is saying, this is why I came, to set people free. Jesus understands his work as the work of liberation. He's going to take stuck people and free them and move them into unstuck. In fact, Jesus' best friend, his name was John. He's one of Jesus' biographers, and he quotes Jesus saying this. Jesus answered them, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. So everyone who's got habits that are outside the way of love, Jesus' way, you're a slave to those habits. Any habit that sort of just leads you down a path of destruction, anything that's unhealthy, anything like that, just like, hey, everyone who practices that, everyone who operates outside of my way of love, you're actually ultimately become a slave to that. But if I set you free, you will, in fact, be free of that. You can walk away. You can be unstuck. You can get to the other side of the wall. You can be unchained from whatever habit or hang up or kind of system or whatever that you've just grown used to operating in that is counter or opposite or anti the way of love. Jesus says, I actually came so that you could be free from that. Now, the earliest Christians, so kind of post the biographers of Jesus, we're kind of a little bit past them, and they take this idea of Jesus being sort of this new Exodus. Like it's bigger now. It's not just Moses and Israel. It's Jesus and the whole world. They take this idea and they run with it. They saw Jesus' life, death, and ultimately what Christians believe his resurrection. He came back to life, right? They see this as the tool that is used to provide our freedom, that it's how we actually move from stuck to unstuck, how we move to the other side of the wall that we keep running into. The earliest Christians, they actually just assume what we know to be true. We all will be stuck at some point in our life, and we all need help getting unstuck. And the early Christians, they understood our help to be Jesus. That just like Israel had Moses, you and I and the whole world now has Jesus. In fact, one of the early Christians, his name's Paul. Today, sometimes people call him the Apostle Paul. He's a really big deal. He ends up writing 2/3 of the Christian scripture. And really, it's just a bunch of letters he wrote. But here's what Paul writes in one of his letters that we have. For freedom, Christ has set us free. So he's just saying, yeah, Jesus came to set you free so that you could live free, so that you could live unstuck. That's why he did that. So stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of, don't go back. And this is actually what I'll just tease out what we're going to do next week. Next week, we're going to look at how there's a tendency for us when things get weird on the other side of the wall to go back and start slamming our head against the wall again. For whatever reason, we kind of have a little bit of breakthrough. We kind of taste freedom, but then it's scary, whatever it is. It's uncomfortable at first. It's hard. So we go back to what we've always known, even if it's bad for us. So this is what Paul's saying. Hey, Jesus set you free so that you could actually live unstuck. That's the whole point. So don't go back. Don't go back to the wall and start slamming your head against it again. What's the use of doing that? In another passage, here's what this guy, Paul, says. For he's rescued us. And here's this dominion of darkness or power of darkness from the dominion of darkness. And he's brought us into a brand new deal, the other side of the wall, a kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption, freedom from slavery, right? Unstuckness, the forgiveness of sins. Now, I want to focus on this word redemption for just a moment, because we always have to remember the Bible didn't fall out of the sky, written in English, right? It's complicated, it's ancient, and it's not written in a language you and I speak. This guy, Paul, he wrote letters in the Greek language. And so what we translate as redemption, it's a Greek word that's actually referring to the Roman slave trade. It actually means to procure by payment or deliver by ransom. And it was used in the ancient Roman world to describe someone who is purchasing a slave's freedom. Now, in the Greco-Roman world, there were all kinds of different slaves. Some of them could buy their own freedom, but many of them could not. And there were slave markets, just like maybe you've seen in movies and, slavery here in the U.S. It's literally like slaves on a stage, and then people are just, bidding, and they're buying human beings. This was happening in the Roman world. Now, most of the time, when someone would buy a slave, they're buying them so that they would come be their slave and work for them. But every once in a while, we actually have a historic record of this. Every once in a while, there would be some people who are purchasing a slave only to set them free, right? And this is the imagery that this guy Paul's giving us, that Jesus is this guy at the slave market saying, I'm going to purchase a slave, not to keep them enslaved, but to set them free from this dominion or kingdom or power of darkness so that they can live free, no longer slaves, so that they don't have to be stuck anymore, that they can live in a state of unstuckness, that Jesus, his life, his death, and again, his resurrection, is coming back to life, right? That this is the purchasing of our freedom. It is clearing the path for us to move from stuck to unstuck, right? That Jesus' death and resurrection, this was the cost of our redemption, our purchase of freedom. It's the vehicle used to move us from stuck to unstuck. Now, I hope you're beginning to see this movement. It's all over the place. There's just this whole little stream that moves from the beginning to the end of the Bible about this slavery to freedom, stuck to unstuck, right? Darkness to light. We're moving. There's progress. There's a way out. There's an other side of the wall that you keep slamming your head into, and there's plenty of space to run on that side of the wall. This is the story that the authors of the Bible just assume is true for every single one of us in this room. And their answer, their solution to our slavery, to our stuckness, is Jesus. They present Jesus as the Redeemer, the guy buying our freedom, purchasing us in our enslaved state and moving us to the other side of the wall into freedom, that we no longer have to keep hitting the same wall again and again. Jesus is presented as the one who purchases our freedom, providing us our own unique Exodus story. Now, that's the big picture. You still with me? I mean, that's a lot. I mean, I just gave you that's like a seminary class in 20 minutes, right? That's a lot, but it's so important. But it's big. It's big picture, it's all of that. What does this look like in an individual's life? That's what I just want to wrap up by just asking the question, what does this look like in a person's life, in your life or in my life? I want to zoom in, and I want to take a story from the life of Jesus where he actually does this. He actually moves someone from stuck to unstuck. And it's really fascinating. I think there's a lot for us to learn in it. So just quickly, Jesus runs into a guy who's been stuck for almost 4 decades, 38 years, we're told. Literally been stuck, same place. Here's the story. Now, there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. Okay, first question. Why are all of these blind, lame, paralyzed people hanging out at this pool? Question number 1. Right? And here's the ruins in Jerusalem that you can go see today, actually. And on the right there is what we think it probably looked like in Jesus' day, this pool of Bethesda. Now, here's the thing. This man is there for 38 years, probably not because of anything that was a part of his Jewish faith or Judaism or the Jewish God. They would often, Yahweh, maybe for that title for God, right? None of that. It probably had a lot more to do with Greco-Roman culture that it made its way into Israel. Remember, Israel had been conquered by Alexander the Great, and Alexander, one of his favorite things to do was just make everywhere Greek. And so he did in Israel. But then the Romans come in, and they kind of like the Greeks too, but they kind of also have their own deal, and that's why we call it the Greco-Roman, maybe for that phrase. So the Greco-Roman culture. Now the Greeks, they had a god named Asclepius. Asclepius was the god of healing, right? And his place of worship, his temple essentially, would be the Asclepion, right? And this served as essentially healing centers in the ancient world. We actually have evidence of them all over the ancient world. There's all these Asclepions, all these places where Asclepius is worshipped. And typically they were built near what people believed to be sacred springs that would kind of flow into shallow pools or baths. And what would happen is that all the ill or all the disabled would congregate at these little regional healing centers, and they would drink and they would bathe in the waters at the Asclepion, and then they would sleep on mats within the temple walls. They would just hang out there, and they would wait by the water, praying and fasting and chanting until Asclepius showed up one day. And how did they know when Asclepius showed up one day? Because the water would begin to ripple, the water would bubble, and everybody knew when that happened, Asclepius had showed up, and you got to get in the water, because if you had the best chance for you being healed, getting that healing miracle when the water was bubbling up. So, is that what's happening here at the pool of Bethesda? I don't know for sure, but there's a clue, I think, in here. Number one, it's where all of the blind, lame, sick, paralyzed people are hanging out. So that's clue number one. But we'll just look. So here's how the story continues to go. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew he'd already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" Now, that's an odd question, I think, to ask a sick person. Do you want to get well? Well, what do you think the answer to that question? It should be absolutely yes. But listen to the man's response. The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred." So there's the second little clue. I think it might have something to do with this guy Asclepius, right? The bubbles, the ripples. Like, no one will take me down there when Asclepius shows up. And while I'm going, another steps down before me. And, the inference is that they're getting the healing and not him. To which Jesus sort of says, really? No one will help you. Someone else always gets ahead of you for 38 years? You couldn't inch your way down to the pool or persuade someone to give you a hand? 38 years, and you've made zero progress? You've been stuck that long? You've been hitting your head against the wall that long? Do you really want to get well? Like, really? Because I'm not seeing any evidence that you actually do. Because getting well does actually have something to do with you, too. You got to get up, get the job, get on with your life. Do you want to be healed? I mean, it's a question, I think, for all of us. Do you want to get sober? Get employed, get educated, get in shape, get over your past, get stronger, healthier, happier? We feel stuck when we make no progress, right? I mean, that's when we feel stuck, when we battle the same discouragement we faced a decade ago, or we're struggling with the same fear that we faced a year ago. When you wake up with the same hang-up. Sometimes Bethesda, that can become our permanent address. And we just feel like everybody just keeps getting to the pool before us. Nobody wants to help. And I think if at all you've ever felt like that, Jesus' response is, I see you. I see you. And Bethesda doesn't have to be your landscape forever. Jesus would say, I have a new destination for your life. I see you. There is an other side to this wall you keep hammering your head into. So listen to Jesus' counsel to this man. Get up. Take up your bed, your mat that you've been sleeping on, and walk. And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Is Jesus, through his life, death, and resurrection, preparing the path? Yes. Is he preparing your heart? Yes. What's your job? Get up. Get up. Stand up. Do something. Take action. Apply for the job. Reach out to a therapist. Get help. Stand up. Make a clean break from the past. Drop that relationship you know is hurting you and bringing you down. Start walking. Assume that something good is going to happen in your life. Set your sights on our North Star, Jesus. Begin the journey. Getting unstuck means getting excited about getting out, getting to the other side of the wall, moving from stuck to unstuck. Believe in the Jesus that believes in you. He believes that you can get up and move on, and he promises to be with you every step of the way. He has already purchased your freedom. He's already prepared the path for you to move from stuck to unstuck, from slavery to freedom, from darkness to light. He's already prepared your heart, and he promises that you will not be getting to the other side of the wall all by yourself. The man says, 38 years, nobody's helped you. Jesus comes along and says, that excuse works no more because I will help. Let's go. Get up and start walking. You doing okay? I know, that was a lot today. Next week's going to be worse, so just, get ready. So, hey, can I pray for us? And then we'll get out of here. Jesus, thanks so much for today. And that we don't have to live stuck, and that we're not the only ones who are stuck. That not just what we sort of modernly observe, but what every author of the Bible saw. We're just all there. We all get stuck. We all need help. But there's hope. There is help. There is a path to take us to the other side of the wall, to move us from slavery to freedom, from stuck to unstuck. That it's been purchased. It's been bought and paid for, and we're free. Would you help us see that you've created a new Exodus story for us, Jesus? The path's there. What you want to do in our heart is there. For many of us, it's now just time to get up. Help us have the courage and the strength to do that. Jesus, we love you, and it's in your name we pray. Amen. Thanks, guys.